Joining us this morning, Jamie Klappholtz of the Hillsborough Young Democrats, Jonathan Torres of the Hillsborough Young Republicans, also Felix Vega down at the end, rounding us out, News Channel 8 associate producer and legal analyst as well. Guys, good to have you here this morning.
Morning, Paul. Morning.
All right, so Jamie and Jonathan, let me go ahead and start with you this morning. We talk about Flynn asking for immunity. Does he have some sort of smoking gun and, against President Trump and the campaign's possible ties with Russia?
I think he probably does. I mean, I don't know whether or not that's going to come out, but I think the fact that he is now asking for immunity when both he and Donald Trump said that asking for immunity shows that you are guilty just shows the profound loss of credibility that this administration has. I mean, Donald Trump was elected to get things done. He said that he could make deals and get things done, but this entire first 70 days of his presidency, it's just been one scandal after another, and they're being evasive on Russia. I mean, the American people deserve an open and transparent investigation into this. This is a bipartisan issue dealing with a foreign government inserting itself into our democratic process.
Jonathan, the thing is, he says he has a story to tell. Yeah. But only if he gets immunity. Well, that raises suspicions.
Felix is the legal expert here, right? So I hope he'll touch on this. But this is actually a pretty common thing when testifying before Congress. And especially in this kind of a environment that we have currently going on in Washington, the Democrats are out for blood. They've been out for blood since November. And they're looking to get their first kill. And Flynn could be it. They're looking to take somebody down from the Trump administration, and Flynn is basically saying, hey, I'll be more than happy to talk to you guys, but I'm not going to give you the opportunity, to come after me afterwards.
And Felix, we know that the Senate Intelligence Committee has already rejected Flynn's request for now. How does that work, and are there different levels of immunity?
It's interesting because in the federal system, they have one type of immunity called use immunity, and basically what that is that if you testify before Congress, then you can't use your statement against you. However, if they find other independent, legitimate proof that you committed a crime through other means, they can still go forward and prosecute him. So that's the catch-22 with immunity. If he starts talking about other people, it gives them other leads to other documents or other investigations. It may come around full circle to him. But also, if they want to grant him immunity, they have to go through a process with the federal courts. It would take 2/3 of the Senate Intelligence Committee to agree to give him immunity. Then it would go to the Justice Department, and they basically file the paperwork with the courts to get an order to make Flynn show up to testify in front of Congress.
Let's talk about the Obama administration. They had coded information before leaving the White House about the Trump campaign and Russia, that they then took the documents and put them in a safe at the Capitol. Is that surveillance, or is that surveilling, or is that just, you might say, preserving records?
No, I think, undoubtedly, this is what Trump has been talking about, throughout, the election, and then obviously even days after he was made president-elect, there were already systems in place where they were monitoring conversations, they were monitoring the people within that campaign and within that transition party that, and all that is coming to light, and so what we find here is that, they're trying to connect the dots on their end, Democrats are, in terms of trying to connect the dots to Trump and Russia, but the reality is that if there had been those connections, I think the Obama administration would have come out with it months ago.
Jamie, surveilling or preserving records?
I think that was preserving records, and I believe that the allegation that Donald Trump made was that he was wiretapping him, which Director Comey said was not true. So, I mean, again, it's just a lack of credibility. And I think when you talk about connecting the dots with Russia, I think those dots have been connected on a number of times, and we had Paul Manafort, we had the dossier of incriminating information about Donald Trump, all coming from our U.S. intelligence agencies, which I think to most of the American people have a lot more credibility than the Trump administration.
Well, and again, those dots have been connected to individuals, but never back to Donald Trump himself. And so there are individuals, and those individuals have removed themselves, from the Trump administration. I think that, again, this is a distraction. I think they see that the Trump administration is a very fast-moving train, and they're trying to create the distraction to stop that train or slow that train down as he continues to implement the agenda that he was elected on.
He has implemented none of his agenda. He could not even get the Affordable Care Act, undone.
Up there for a vote.
Yeah, I mean, he's had two Muslim bans that were considered unconstitutional and didn't end up becoming enacted.
And you're talking about the travel ban.
Yes.
So that was actually the next question that I was going to ask about the travel ban. Revised travel ban now, because it's already been struck down by a federal court in Hawaii. That was late Wednesday. Felix, let's start with you. Where does the case actually go from here?
Okay, so the travel ban, the revised travel ban was challenged in a Hawaii federal court. They put in place an injunction about 2 weeks ago. Wednesday, they went back to court to see if they were going to make it a permanent injunction, which would keep the ban off the books for now, and they were going to go litigate it through the court process. They could appeal it, and then also Trump could rewrite it. The problem is that when they went back to court this time, the Trump administration had nothing new to offer. They were relying on the same argument that the executive branch, the president, had ultimate authority to decide this issue, and said that the court shouldn't be looking at this. But Hawaii had a real... they had something in their pocket this time. They had that leaked security report that came out from Homeland Security saying that the travel ban, that people from these countries don't pose a risk necessarily, that the citizenship is not an indicator of terror. And so when they have that, the judge challenged them basically again and basically gave them a stern warning and told them, do not come back to this court with a dressed up travel ban. And they said the court will not crawl into a corner, pull the shutters close, and pretend it has not seen what it has. It seems like when he made all these campaign promises, no one was going behind him and figuring out the legal mechanisms to get these things done when he got into office. So he can appeal it or he can rewrite it.
That's what I was going to say. What do you think the president's going to do? Fight it out in court or rewrite it again?
When this happened in the Washington court, he vowed he was going to fight it. He said, I will see you in court. And then a couple weeks later, he ends up with a revised travel ban that ends up going to another court in Hawaii. So he's spreading their resources a little thin in the legal community. I think ultimately if you get one court saying the travel ban's unconstitutional, he just needs one appellate court to say it's not, and then it goes to the Supreme Court.
Jamie, Jonathan, your thoughts here?
I think that it's going to go up to the Ninth Circuit, and I think it will ultimately go to the Supreme Court of the United States. And in the first go-around with this executive order, there was language in there saying that he was going to give a priority to Christian refugees. I mean, that was on its face discriminatory. So they took that out. But like the court said, you can't just ignore these statements that Trump made during his campaign that he wanted to ban Muslims and look at the effect of these orders. I mean, you can dress it up all you want, but it still has discriminatory intent. And I think certainly the Ninth Circuit will see that, and I also think that the Supreme Court of the United States will see that.
Jonathan, if it looks like a pig, dressed up like a pig, like you said, it's a pig.
No, well, see, I think what's going to happen is both of these are complicated issues, but the travel ban and Obamacare, okay, it took almost a year for Obamacare to be created and voted and passed and all that. I think these are just first stabs at these parts of his agenda that he's going to want to push through, and the truth of the matter is that he's going to keep trying until he gets a result that he's able to see as fit. The truth of the matter is, again, complicated issues. They're not going to be resolved overnight, and I'm pretty confident that his team is going to work to try to find, what way is the best way to implement these.
All right, Jamie.
You made a really good point there about Obamacare taking, a year to be enacted, and it just kind of makes me think about the fact that Trump is taking this kind of slapshot approach to governing, and he's doing first stabs. He's just throwing stuff out there within just a few weeks, within the first week of this executive order, and with the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. And it just seems very reckless to just throw stuff, kind of throw paint at a wall and see if it'll stick.
Well, I think, what we saw during the Trump administration was a very similar approach, which he saw that as kind of the flagship of his legacy, which was Obamacare. And so when he had the majority in both houses, that's when they took that opportunity to push Obamacare through. In the same respect, I think Trump is not counting on the midterm elections, to help him prolong his agenda. I think he's trying to take as much opportunity as he can with the current control of both houses to get as much of this through as possible, even if it's a little sloppy at first. Again, these are people who've never been in D.C., right? He's, a lot of the people are kind of learning as they go, but they're certainly moving the ball in the direction that a lot of his supporters want him to.
All right, got to wrap it up there. I'm being told in my ear we got to go. Jamie, Jonathan, Felix, thanks for being here this morning.
Paul.